that importance comes from its pedigree, where the paintings used to live. And the paintings that went with it, the fact that we have a picture, and the other two that belong to the series are in incredibly prominent and very old collections, right? So two of the pictures that went in suite with this are in London, the National Gallery, which means it came out of the old collection of King Charles I before he had his head cut off. Okay, that's one. That's where two of them are. The third one is in the Prado in Madrid, and came out of the collection of the Holy Roman Emperor, right, who collected Titian works. So the fact that for some reason, when the National Gallery was set up in 1937 and even later, one of these is still floating around for somebody to snap up. That's a pretty amazing thing, right? And one of the things that knocks me out about the National Gallery in general is the degree to which we have these first-rate pictures, just really first-rate pictures, even though the National Gallery, as a museum, is very late to the game, right? They're late to the dance, and they get to dance with the belle of the ball, And on numerous occasions, because, by 1937, the Metropolitan Museum has been around for 50 years. There's a museum in Detroit, there's a museum in Cleveland, there's a museum in Boston, right? And they're picking up stuff that are any one of those museums would kill to have, right? And this is fantastic, right, that we have this here. I remember walking in, and I'd forgotten it was at the National Gallery. It's like, this is, if you're going to make a list of 5 pictures to go see at the National Gallery, this is one. Right. Duke of Ferrara's palace, Federico Gonzaga of Ferrara, in his Plaisir Palace, right? And that's kind of what this whole story is tapping in to the wine vat, tapping into this idea of the Duke's Plaisir Palace, right? So it's a party that's hosted by Bacchus, the god of wine, and wine flows freely, right? So we see little Bacchus there filling up this crystal jug with wine from the bunghole of the keg, the wine keg here. The scene itself is described in Ovid, the Roman poet Ovid, O-V-I-D, has a book called The Feasts, or the Fasti. And he describes this particular moment when the gods are together reveling, in a pastoral setting. I got this. Here's a handout for you. Pass this one back this way. So we're going to talk about the individual gods that are there and identify them. And do I still have my copy of the handout? The one that's kind of greater than the rest. Well, this one is going around. I should have one here too. Well, those are going around. Oh, here I did. I got it. We're good to go. This is just so you can figure out who's who in this drunken festival that we're looking at here, right? Right, so the story is Bacchus is hosting this party for his fellow gods. He's different than the Bacchus that we saw in Mantegna's print, where he was an athletic adult, right, during that sort of wine fest, kegger craziness, frat party, if you will. On the far right is Lotis, L-O-T-I-S. She is a woodland nymph, a sprite, if you will. Not quite goddess, right, but certainly a supernatural figure. She's number 12 on your handout. And she is sort of the source of fresh water, right? And because of her being an allegorical source of fresh water, she becomes a symbol of chastity, purity, right? So she wears white, but she's not so chaste that she's not willing to drink with the other gods when the wines are flowing. So she has drank herself asleep, right? The fellow in red, who seems pretty conscious, that look is just incredible. Blue, sorry, not red, it's orange and blue, right? Concentrate, right? You've had too many glasses of wine, and you start to hold on to it really tightly like that because you're afraid you're going to drop it. And he's just like, ugh. She's not seeing anything past the brim of that cup, And notice how beautifully drawn, like the three-dimensional quality of the round objects. Another wine goblet just off the knee of Lotus, the vat off to the right with Bellini's signature on it. And that's Apollo behind her. As she's fallen asleep, her clothing has conveniently fallen off. So this symbol of chastity has now become an erotic turn-on for some of the other gods. And as you can see, directly behind her, that randy fellow in the sort of copper-colored robe is checking out what else he gets to see while she's asleep. Yeah, and it's all treated very lightheartedly, you know. And I made this joke before, because date rape is so funny, right? But that's kind of what's going on, right? Is he's going to take advantage of her while she sleeps, which is, you know, by modern enlightened standards, quite horrific. So she's laying there. There's almost a sense that even in her grogginess, she's trying to keep him from lifting her skirt, right? And who knows, maybe he's responsible for having bared her breast. Maybe it didn't just happen to fall, but he loosened it, and he's taking advantage of her, right? That figure that's doing the naughtiness is Priapus, number 11, and he's smiling down at her. He is the god of the harvest, right? And so you can see he has fresh cut flowers in his hair, and in addition to that, he has put his side in the tree in the upper right corner, hung it in the, sort of chucked it up there in the tree. Well, he's got other, dare I say, other reaping to do, right? He's got other fields to plow, as it were. And so he's not bothering with that anymore, and he's now turned his attention to Lotus. Have you heard of Priapus, the god of the harvest? He is also the god of male virility. These two things go together, right? Harvesting, whereas the goddess of the earth would be something different. She gets harvested, right? Men do the harvesting. So to be a harvester is to be incredibly virile. Priapus, all of these have a legacy in Roman art. Trigger alert. If you don't like male nudity, and I was trying to take notes and not look at the screen. Priapus, or look up if you're interested, Priapus is very well endowed in Roman art. Just massive, like beyond human comprehension, right? Larger than his thigh. And that's the way he normally appears throughout the history of Roman art. What Bellini did, this is where it's kind of funny. He gives it a bulge, but you'll also notice that Apollo's holding this violin back there, and right, it becomes this sort of two-dimensional. It's just like, there it is, right? He's got a hand on it as well, and you know, Freud said sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. Well, sometimes a violin handle is not just a violin handle. You know, this is meant as an illusion, as sort of a cute little snickery illusion. Anybody who knows who he is will pick up that reference right away. That allegorically, the string or the violin neck of Apollo is meant to be a way of a little bit more chaste representation of the fact that Priapus is endowed like a porn star, right? Well, he's not the only one that's getting all hot and bothered by this activity. Everybody here is both drunk and randy, naughty, right? So here's Neptune. And you can see that he's groping the woman next to him. He's laid down his trident. You can see it just behind that bowl of fruit. It's Neptune's three-pronged trident, right, which is the way you normally identify him. We saw him in a Mantegna print in the background, remember? Standing on it was the sea gods. In the background was the statue of Neptune with his back to us with his trident. But you'll notice that Bellini again is playing with the two-dimensional layout of things, and that the trident sort of points directly, right, toward Lotus's thighs, right? So it's again intentional and really not particularly subtle way of giving us this underscoring of the naughtiness that's going on here, right? What it's really all about. Around the outside of this, we have satyrs. These are Dionysus or Bacchus's henchmen. They are half man, half goat. To the ancient Greeks and Romans, to be subhuman was not a positive thing, whereas in other cultures, half animal makes you godlike. In this case, it shows that they're given to their animal instincts, right? Their baser instincts. And so you can see they're probably the drunkest ones in the bunch, right? Carousing around, but they're also having to serve everybody, right? They're the servants. So we have two of them here, another one sort of grayed out in the background behind Neptune there, and behind that beautiful sort of blue and white bowl there. Again, Bellini's ability to render space and atmosphere and color, it's all color, isn't it? There's not a lot of black and white in this. All the shading it seems to be achieved with atmosphere, doesn't it? And I think that's what makes it such a fantastic picture. There's another satyr in the background dancing right back into here. And that's a Titian ad, right? But he's added it in to sort of tie into the idea. And again, this is all right, running wild in the woods. It kind of underscores the theme that Bellini is working through in this picture, and Titian picks it up. As we read Ovid, what happens, of course, is that while this is all going on, everybody's watching to see if Priapus is going to get away with this or not. Silenus on the left, and we saw Silenus in the Mantegna, this big fat Jabba the Hutt kind of guy, right? In this case, he's old and thinner, but he's got this donkey that he's brought because he's a herdsman, right? Silenus is a farmer, right? And not cowboy, I guess. and he's brought the donkey with him, and just at the moment when he's about to lift the skirt in Ovid's poem, the donkey brays, and Lotus wakes up, and everybody goes, and it's all over, right? No harm, no foul. I know, it's ridiculous, right, Margaret? It's crazy. But that's the story, right? And so what's great is that Bellini has given us, I've only noticed this with these recent pictures, because I got some good in and closes. The teeth in the mouth is opening. You can see he's kind of pulling his teeth back, and he's starting to go, he's about ready to let loose, right? So we're in on the joke, right? We're in on the fun, if you will, of watching Priapus get embarrassed by the fact that he's not going to get away with his little frat party shenanigans, right? Yeah. Great details. Here's a close-up of that wine pad, and you can see it's got Bellini's signature date on it, right? As if tagged to the wine pad. We've seen Bellini, when he signs things, do this. Remember the Madonna pictures? Goffin made the point that when he signs pictures this way, he's calling attention to the reality of the things that are there, right? The reality, in that case, the reality is the Virgin Mary as a miraculous vision for us, right? Well, he takes that idea and he applies it elsewhere where it has nothing to do with religious devotion. It's just a great little scheme, right? So we saw with the St. Francis picture in the Frick, how he puts his signature on a little piece of paper stuck in the tree, that he's communing with nature like St. Francis is, right? Well, here, he puts his name on an empty wine vat, right? And I think that's it, right? He's participating as well. He's kind of part of this. He's intoxicating us with this amazing picture, right? Which is, okay, I hate to say it, but if you can put the icky daybreak stuff out of your mind, it's meant to be about luxury and intoxication. Right? And it's huge, right? Remember this in the museum? It's 6 foot square, right? Maybe slightly bigger, 7 foot square. So it's really meant to sort of overwhelm our senses. And I think Bellini's really trying to do that. And in the same way that wine can overwhelm your senses. So if he puts his signature there on the wine vat, he's sort of saying, let me be your Bacchus. Right? Let art be the wine that floods your entire experience. You know? Nice thing is what we do to hang, right? Feet may be tired in the museum, but you don't wake up the next day on what? Thank you. Right? And with that in mind, right in the center, right in front of the feet of Mercury, is this amazingly drawn almost as if it's there for us to reach out and grab. You know, it establishes the space on one hand, but it's also sort of nobody's using it. Maybe, Jay, you should. You know, grab your goblet, go over to Bacchus and have him filled up for you, right? And it's very, very invitational to come and participate. And regardless of the fact that there's really a sex crime going on in the background, it does have that power. As I mentioned before we got into the details, right? It's very easy to look at this picture and just be overwhelmed by the color and the paint, right? And maybe when we go downtown, we'll stick our nose in it. That the sleeve of Jupiter here, this eagle, it's just fantastic. I didn't bring in details. There's these scrapings. So it's white, but then there's these overlays. So dry brush overlays of pink on it. And you can maybe make out, so it gives it that little rusty color that you see. And when you see it, it's just, he's on top of it, right? And by this time, Bellini's, you know, at the very end of his career, he's been painting for roughly 60 years of experience, right? And just has a huge reputation in Venice and beyond. Like I said, this is for the Duke of Ferrara nearby. But when Albrecht Dürer, who we'll talk about later today, or probably more likely next week, when Albrecht Dürer comes to Venice in 1506, Albrecht Dürer is a German artist from Nuremberg, and he's coming down to Venice because his prints are being copied by Venetian printmakers. And it's one thing to do homage, copies are fine, but they're copying his signature, and that's no good. In fact, somebody told me, a guy who's a curator in Minneapolis told me that it's the very first copyright infringement lawsuit on the books anywhere in Europe. It's Albrecht Dürer going to Venice. When he gets there, he says, Jacopo Bellini is very, very old, but he is still the very best there is. Right? And, you know, that sense of color and atmosphere that he learned from 40 years earlier from Antonello da Messina, right? The impact of that and the shift of oil paint, and beginning to think about oil paint not just as a different medium you apply in the same way, but it comes with its own rules, right? It comes with its own techniques. It's something he begins in 1475, and by the end of his career, he's just, there isn't anybody better for giving that sense of an overall atmosphere of light, color that seems to pervade, even in areas that are colored, you just get this sense that the oranges and the blues that you see are in the air around the different figures. There is no one better. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about some other artists that we haven't picked up yet. In particular, we'll start with Carlo Crivelli. So we're going to pick, I guess we can call this lecture the 3 C's. This part of the lecture. Crivelli, Cima di Conegliano, and Carpaccio, right, our next 3 to cover. Crivelli makes a very nice contrast to Bellini in style. You notice from looking that he's much more old-fashioned looking, even though they are roughly the same time period. He doesn't have any of Bellini's sense of atmosphere, of glowing color. The colors are surface rather than, they seem to be like they exist on the outside rather than seeming to glow from within. And his figures, you know, Bellini, so many times Bellini's figures will sort of soften at the edges and blur a little bit into the background. And Crivelli is incredibly hard-edged, right? Sort of sharp edge. There was a National Gallery catalog says it's kind of metallic looking in a way, apart from the gold leaf in the background, which is very old-fashioned, right? But just the way he draws has a sort of sharp-edged quality that I quite like. And part of the reason for this is that whereas Bellini responded to Antonello da Messina, right, picked up oil paint, Carlo Crivelli didn't. He continued to paint in egg tempera, right, all the way to around 1500. So he's using the older style of paint, which means that his work tend to look a little bit more old school, right? They tend to have more retrograde sort of look about them. And again, it may sound like I'm overly critical on poor Carlo Crivelli, but that's part of the issue. began his career studying in Mantua. That's where he was born. And that's where Mantegna was. And so Mantegna remains for Carlo Crivelli a very, very important touchstone for him. And I think his maintenance of this hard-edgedness may have something to do with the sort of the greater influence of Mantegna than of Bellini, because he's in Padua rather than in Venice. Now he goes and he studies in Venice for a little bit, and then from there he moves sort of further down the coast. So remember, Venice is. Let's see if I can tack my geographics. Right. So here's Italy, right? France, Italy, and it's just here, and this goes down over here to Greece. Okay, and Venice, remember, kind of like right there, right? And Padua is over here. So it moves to this region, sort of down here, which is called the Marche region. Marche, right? C-H is hard, right, Margaret? C-H is hard. So the Marche region is really kind of nowhere. It's not a particularly teeming region. It's not forward-looking. It's sort of the vanguard edge of Renaissance painting. And so his style and his use of an earlier technique may be related to people who want something slightly more traditional, slightly less avant-garde than in Venice. But what's interesting is that when he finds pictures working in the Marche, right, he finds it as Carlo Crivelli from Venice. So he's marketing himself as Mr. Avant-garde, even though the pictures seem to be very much geared toward the taste of people who aren't used to leading-edge artwork yet. Pushing in a different direction. So, in this particular picture, he's surrounded the Virgin and Child. We looked at him before, right? He's my little Mr. Bean Jesus, right? He looks like he's about to spin up. But in any event, he's blessing us like the priest on the altar. This is meant for private devotion, right? It's fairly small. It's about like yay, cross. Right? She presents him to us in the Podigatria pose, where she has her hand across like this. We read about that in the Goffin article, the old Byzantine icon, where she points the way. He stands on a parapet, very much like Bellini, but maybe even more like an altar, because of the red cloth that's dropped across it, which is very much like the decorations of an altar cloth. So the reference of Christ being the communion, right? Christ being the host is that much stronger here than in this particular Bellini, right? So it ties into many of the ideas she was talking about. Now we also have fruit, well drawn and around them, and you see in the upper right corner there's an apple. I don't think I have to explain that to us. Original sin, right? Adam and Eve and the apple, and Christ is the new Adam, Mary is the new Eve. Each of them undoes the sin of the original couple, right? Even though they're mother and son rather than husband and wife. Right? Upper left-hand side are pears, right? And pears were seen as a symbol of Christ's love for mankind. I read that in the National Gallery catalog. I tried to look up why that is. I don't know. But suffice to say, those who know have cited that as an example. Right? Pears as God's love for mankind. Finally, on the altar itself is a very large cherry as well. Cherries, because of the red fruit, the red juice, were linked to Christ's blood. Right? And again, with the idea of Christ's sacrifice for man. So the fruit there is all symbolic. I'm really quite interested in the sort of parallel between the cherry on the white altar and the bright red stone in the middle of her pearl crown against her equally white forehead. Right? In many ways, again, she will suffer, if you will, for us in the same way. Right? Against the background, we see the tooling. This idea of working the background into three dimensions is something that Crivelli does regularly. And again, it's part of this sort of more old school look. There's a Crivelli up in the Walters Art Museum as well. Same ideas that we saw before. Christ on that little pillow, the parapet with the altar cloth on it, surrounded by two saints. Can you identify the two saints that are on either side of her? On the other side of the Virgin Christ. Who's that on the left? St. Francis, exactly. Wearing the same clothes we saw in the Bellini picture, right? He's very easy to identify because of his clothing. Who's the guy on the far right? The old man with the red and blue thing in his hands. We've seen him before too. Close, almost a Bernardino, St. Bernardino of Siena, who preached the name of Christ and always appears with this disc with IHS on it, the name of Christ. And we saw him in Jacopo Bellini's work. And I was kind of intrigued when I pulled this up just to show you him. The degree to which the facial features are so similar, right? Hairdo and facial features. Now, there's two possible explanations for that. One, this Bellini picture was in Mantua. Was in Padua, which is where Crivelli studied, where he began his career. And this was an altar inside the cathedral there in San Antonio. And we talked about that when we looked at Jacopo Bellini. So he may have seen this picture, right? It's altogether likely that he did see this picture as a young man, right? So he would have known him. If he's going to draw St. Bernardino, this would be his touchstone, right? But the other reason it might be so similar is that Bernardino was a relatively recent saint. He's a 15th century saint. People knew what he looked like, right? Now, I'm not saying that Bellini or Crivelli knew him personally, but they could have gotten accounts of what this guy looked like because he's not 1,000 years old, right? He's 25 years old. His death was 25 years ago when Bellini painted that picture. So there may well have been with Bernardino a greater sense of portraiture. And even Francis, even though he kind of looks the same, he doesn't look exactly the same, but Francis is more than 200 years old at this point, 250 years old, right? So these are two ways we might explain that. The tiny figure, I love the tiny, he's a donor. He's the patron, and that's also very, very old school. And I think I'm missing a slide here coming up, alas. Something got cut out, so you'll have to just forgive the rough segue to the next picture. But yes, he's the donor. None of the details of him. But he's wearing a pair of clogs on his feet, like wooden clogs on his feet. And he's a monk. And he's dressed as a monk, and in fact, he has the same pose as exactly. But this idea of including a figure tiny in the picture, I don't know where it went. It must be coming. Something happened. I must have accidentally cut it off. But that's very 14th century. And you see all the time in 14th century pictures, a tiny little donor included at the feet of the figure, out of scale. And in the 15th century, it became more normal with the advent of perspective and the sense of realism and naturalism. That if a donor is going to appear, they're going to appear the same size as the other figure. Maybe just off to the side or something. And so that's like the old background that's on the other one, right? The tooling of the surface, that is another way in which Crivelli is set up. There's a good chance this slide comes up way out of order. Right? It does, as a matter of fact. So here, in this picture, by Crivelli, you see the same thing, right? Down in the corner next to the Madonna and Child, but boy, is that an ugly little baby. His head just looks like it's been cut off and put back on wrong. You know? It just sort of sits there like a Quasimodo baby, like a hunchback of Carlo Crivelli. But in the lower corner we see another donor, and you'll notice that in both of these images, it's true, but Crivelli didn't leave a space for him to be painted. In other words, he painted right over it. The painting existed without him, right? And he's been painted then into a space that wasn't reserved for him, right? Now, normally artists are very, very economical, right? If you're going to paint something there and you know you're going to paint there, you'll leave it unpainted because you don't want to paint over paint, right? There's no point in doing that. But here you can see that the paint's kind of a bit transparent through time, and you can see right through it, and there he is praying. But definitely intended to be portraiture, right? He's heavy set, you know. He doesn't look like the other person that we saw. Even though he's got a tonsure, he's not particularly monastic in his dress, right? But this is also very old school. Now you'll also start to note from beneath him, there's the Virgin's crown on the edge of her base, kind of sticking out into our space, and it's been built up in 3 dimensions as well, right? So he's actually built the gesso up sculpturally. Hey, Huda, you'd asked me, and I hadn't even thought of these, right? About places where they've built up sculpture in 3 dimensions. And we saw that when we looked at Giambono, that St. Peter, his keys were built up in 3 dimensions in the National Gallery. But that's something that was, again, a holdover from the 14th century. And artists had more or less stopped doing that, right? In lieu of creating a sort of seamless illusion of space, right? And not something that draws into attention the material nature of the thing that we're looking at. Right? So, 2 different ways right here in this corner that we see Carlo Cruzelli being very much backward. I like it, by the way. These are all terms that sound disparaging. I really like it. Right? I love looking at the way he's handling the tempera paint and the sort of hairlines everywhere we look. And here's the slide that's coming out of what happened here, I don't know. My life went crazy. But there's our the little donors down below here in this 14th century picture by Bernardo Dotti in the National Gallery. And that's exactly what he's doing there. And then, see, I don't know what happened here. And then there's St. Peter with his key, where we can see the same thing we saw there. Okay. So sorry about the rough finger. I don't like that happening, but it happened. Some nice details of our picture. Again, doesn't he look like he's choking on or something? Yeah, I don't know. There's something about his face that seems that way. And you'll notice as we look at it, both Christ himself and around her head, we have some of the same fruits that we saw in that little devotional panel, right? So Christ is holding this monster apple, right? This is a big apple there, because again, his job here is to expiate the sin of Adam. She again holds him in exactly that Bodhisattva pose, right? So whenever you see her doing one hand under the hip, the other one going, right? Carol Merrill behind door number 3, right? Let's make a deal. I just don't find I gotta retire because I don't want to learn new jokes, right? They're all like 50 years old. Or, in this case, 20 plus years old guys. I said, I don't want to make any jokes about Taylor Swift. I don't know. Right? So anyway. But there you see, you go, here it is. This is what you get, right? And that's what Bodhikatri means, is the indicator of the way, right? The shower of the way. So he is the way, the truth, and the light, right? And he's now holding that apple, which is not part of the Bodhikatri. You'll also notice as you look behind her that we have pears again, sort of miraculously floating. They're tied, aren't they? Tied up into the scroll over her throat. So we have more apples on the left and pears on the right. And then you also notice that the carved throat itself has these dog heads, which are really kind of cool, right? And then they come back and they almost look like sea serpents or something, but then that animal turns into a plant and gives these scaly things coming out, and then it opens up and there's grapes in there, right? Which are obviously for Jesus. Grapes are really important, right? Grapes make wine. Wine is the blood of Christ. Christ's sacrifice is what expiates sin. It all ties together, right, with the apple that he's holding there. Finally, you'll also notice that above her head and beneath her feet, on that marbleized face underfoot, and up above overhead, there are these shells, right? A clamshell down below, a sort of very stylized shell up above and turned blue. These shells are there specifically to link. So they're sort of as a symbol of the virgin birth of Mary. And it goes back to the legend of Venus, the birth of Venus, right? right? Boccaccio's the most famous version, but there are others as well, where Venus was born in the ocean and floated to shore on a conch shell, right? And the way that Venus was born was through the miraculous intervention of God and Earth, basically. The god Uranus was castrated in heaven, and his testicles fell into the ocean. And that's what gave birth to Venus. And apparently, by legend, that's also what gave birth to Seafoam. So think about that next to the meeting. Long and the short of it is that allegory of God coming down to earth and then miraculously giving birth is seen as a parallel to Mary, right, and also to the birth of Christ, and especially with the Immaculate Conception of Mary, which is just becoming an idea in the late 15th century. Over and above that, Mary is spiritual love, whereas Venus is carnal love. There's lots of parallels, right? And Venus' son is Cupid, who also distributes love. Mary's son is Christ. You see, it just goes on and on, right? And this is the sort of thing that theologians and the philosophers in the 15th century just went rampant with, right? So that's what these two forms, down below and up above, are meant to help us with, is this idea of the specialness, the virginity of the Virgin Mary. Also, perhaps even a reference back to her own virgin birth in Catholic theology. You'll notice also that it is around the outside is an inscription. Memento me, remember me, Mater Dei, Mother of God, Regina Coeli, Queen of Heaven, eternally, right? So the Coeli has been truncated, right, abbreviated. C-E-L-I is Coeli, Regina Coeli. And these are the exact words of an Easter song sung in praise of Mary, right? And are put there to remind us of that, right, as we're looking at it. Now, it's a very, very large work. I remember seeing this when we were down there, but it's roughly 6 feet tall or so. It's really quite big, 5 feet tall. And it originally was part of a larger altarpiece with numbers of different scenes together. So she was the center part, and there were saints on either side, other half-length saints and lunettes above, and there would have been originally an amazing sort of sculpted frame around it all, which is a very old-school kind of altar. And we saw one very briefly, a sort of wrecked up one from the Walters in Baltimore by Antonio Vivarini, when we were looking at him a while back. But again, that form, and then now you start to notice the gold background behind the well-drawn curtains that continues into the side scenes. It's very sort of old school, right, in the way that he's approaching art making. But it's important to remember that many of the works that we had were originally part of something grander, something bigger. This was in the church that it was commissioned for, which is in the Marche region, all the way till the 19th century, and then the church was slated to be torn down, and the altar was cut up at that point, right, and sold off. And so parts of it are in Oklahoma, right, parts are in Boston, in the Gardner Museum in Boston, and we've got the best part, right, here in the National Gallery of Pacific. Our next of our 3 C's, Cima da Conegliano. His real name is Giovanni Battista John the Baptist Cima. Conegliano is a town. It's a little hilltop town. And it's tempting to think all the buildings that we see on hilltops in Cima's works relate back. Every now and then, Conegliano, the town, appears in Cima's pictures. Not this one, right, but elsewhere. Still, you'll notice behind the Baptist this Venetian interest in the surrounding Alps, and we're sort of here moving out of the flatlands of the Veneto and up into the hills as we work our way in that direction. Cima is much closer in spirit to Bellini. and much more part of that avant-garde trend that Bellini represents. His color is fantastic. His sense of atmosphere is very good. He's active in Venice. And this is the reason why he's marching in step with Bellini, whereas Crivelli's kind of going his own direction. Had only visited Venice for a bit and then worked in the region to the south of it. When it comes to including donors, Cima, this is from the textbook, Cima includes donors that look at least proportionally like they belong there. I love the idea that he's tucked down below, he's kind of poking his head up in the picture. He's photobombing it, Here's this nice, I'm going to make a nice cameo there, and then here I am, right? And you'll also notice that very much like Bellini, we've got a background that's populated with activity as well, right? So, and then again, a sense of atmosphere and infusive color everywhere is key for him. But he loves these hilltop towns that sort of spill down the side of the hill, which is exactly what Conegliano does. I've not been, but I've read about it at least. Right? So, who are our saints? Who's this? St. John. Which is St. John? Halfway over. St. John the Baptist. Sorry? Well, I think this underneath is meant to be the heresy. So the way John the Baptist is that John the Baptist is only done to never carry that. But little tiny stick, there's something that he's carrying, is the sign of the Baptist. Right? So it's John the Baptist on the right. Also, I think John the Baptist is almost always ancient. Right? So there he is. And also, I think the fact that he's got no shirt on, underneath, and he comes down, goes to, the Baptist goes off to the wilderness, right? He goes off to, Stephen wants to pray, and he screams, I am the voice, crying in the wilderness, right? This is where he meets Jesus, and then he's baptized in Jordan, because he's out, away from the city. So he represents a saint who is divorced from the city, and that's what accounts for, I think, the distance to the city in the background behind them, is that the Baptist is certainly intended to be associated with distance from the city, right? The wilderness, the desert. I brought in just a real nice detail of the background, just to show you there ain't nothing there, right? We've seen, when we look at Bellini, it seems as if the background was crawling with things, right? And little elements that added to the meaning that sometimes brought up surprising questions that maybe we couldn't even answer, But with Cima's work, at least this one, there isn't anything back there. This is just to prove that underneath the trees, there aren't a couple of figures about to be naughty, like we saw in Bellini. Who's the other saint? Jerome, exactly. We saw him before. He beats his breast with a rock. You'll notice the way he's holding his hand. It's almost like, where's my rock? You expect to find one there because of the way he's holding his hand. And just like the Bellini St. Jerome reading, we see and it's the same color too. This sort of aqua blue, right, light aqua blue robe exposes now underneath. You get the sense of his hand on his chest. This is the chest where he normally beats with the rock to deny himself the comfort of any comfort, for that matter, right? And he too goes off to the wilderness, just like John the Baptist. So there must be something. We don't know where this originally came from, right? But certainly there is a symbolic or thematic link between the two saints that are there, and that must have had a particular resonance for the patron of the work, the person who bought it. I love how little baby Jesus is blessing St. Jerome, right, and sort of moving toward him, and how the Virgin so lightly kind of holds his little foot, there. It's really very cute, and how Christ grabs her thumb. Christ is always grabbing the Virgin's thumb. I think all the way back to the 14th century, pointing picture after picture where he's got her by his thumb. And I read somewhere that it was some sort of odd reference to like the resurrection. I have no idea how, right? But it is equally important that he is buck naked, right? And in studying images of Renaissance art, it's amazing the degree to which artists go to sometimes great trouble to show us Christ's genitalia, to make sure that we know he's fully human, right? But that has to do with the idea that the incarnation, that Christ's birth, was not simply God come to earth, but God become fully human. Because unless Christ is fully human, he can't truly die, and if he doesn't truly die, the sacrifice for salvation does not work. So it's been pointed to repeatedly that Christ's humanity, Christ's genitalia, Christ, if you will, his sexuality, right, is a very important theme for Renaissance painters. But they're not just doing it because, okay, babies are naked. Because there's lots of things you don't see baby naked Christ doing, right? He's never being chastised. He's never having his diapers changed. You know, there's lots of things you don't see. But what you do see is so frequent that it has to be an issue for them. Now he's blessing Jerome, and Jerome's gaze is kind of interesting. It's almost at Christ, but it's hard to say if he's not looking at Christ or if he's looking past him and over toward the Baptist, right? And if you look behind St. Jerome, you'll notice that the rock formation underneath that hilltop town is really weird, isn't it? There's this natural arch, you can see through it. And I think we're supposed to remember the cave that St. Jerome prays in. Remember the one from Bellini where you had that rock cave over the top that went over? And it was kind of inexplicable as well, right? There was that, because the light was still on him, even though it seemed as if he was inside of the opening of a cave. So I think this is certainly a reference to think that this is his landscape in a way, right? And if we think about that picture that we saw last class session, right? St. Jerome was sitting there, he's reading, he also had his hand down like that, right? And he was looking directly at a cross that he had made, right? And here, he's looking at Christ, but I think he's also looking at the cross that St. John the Baptist had. And so all of it's almost more like he is the prominent thing of the two of them. He's the more important one for whomever did this, because all the other elements around it seem to relate to the experience of St. Jerome. Right? And we'll have a reading after spring break that talks about the importance of St. Jerome in the Renaissance, but also to people in Venice. And so this is another picture that sort of points in that same direction. Again, just because we have these nice details, here's the mountaintop town, and you'll notice that it's in ruin. Right? That's exactly what we saw in Bellini's one. Whole other thought I'll get you to in a second, right? It's in ruin. So that's certainly a choice on Cima's part, and I think it's again to suggest that the world is not ideal. A world is in fact someplace civilization is something to escape from in order to find something better somewhere else. Jay.
What country was Jerome in?
He's fourth. Yes, roughly. Yeah, they're the church fathers, right? They're two of the fathers of the church. So I think he's, roughly 4th century. Yeah. But he's obviously not contemporary with St. John the Baptist. And that's normal for these images, is you gather saints from different time periods. There's a term that was often used for these, sacra conversazione, a sacred conversation, because they're a bunch of saints that are communing with each other, but which have absolutely no sort of correlation chronologically. I brought this detail on just to look at the color, right? And one of the reasons I really wanted to talk about Venetian painting all semester anyway was just to get into the paint, because these guys really know what they're doing. Visual blending, right? It's proto-impressionism, and especially in that robe. Look at all the colors you can see there. It looks like a pastel drawing, doesn't it? Like a Degas pastel. With the purples and the oranges and the blues and the greens, right? What an understanding of how color works. And this is, I think, what gives it that pervasive quality, where the color seems to be everywhere and infusing even the air that they occupy. It's absolutely fantastic. And Bellini is great, but Cima's no slouch, right? He's really quite good. We have, I think, one last SEMA picture to look at in this round, if I can get this to go forward. There it is. St. Helena. Does anybody know who St. Helena was? She's also 4th century. She's the mother of Constantine the Great. Constantine's mother. And she was a Christian by legend before he was. And she went to the Holy Land on pilgrimage, and while there found the true cross of Christ. It's a wonderful legend. Well, it's not wonderful because it's totally anti-Semitic, but it is kind of a cool legend. And she was the one who identified the sites where most of the places in Jerusalem are now situated. So Constantine built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre on the site where St. Helena said it was, right? Guided by God. So here she stands in a landscape. I guess it's supposed to be Jerusalem, but it isn't, right? Maybe she's in heaven, she's barefoot, after all. But she's holding now the cross of Christ, one of the major things she found. This is a great story, and I think we'll end with that, and then we'll look at the details next week when we come back, right? The story is that she went looking for the true cross, and she's looking for it. She found that there was this guy that said he knew where it was, but he hated Christians and wouldn't tell them. So she throws it in a well and starves it until he tells her, and he pulls it back up and eats it. Right? Anyway, so they pointed over here, so they go, they did, and sure enough they find it, right? Right where he told them it was going to be. But it's crazy because the two thieves that were used back in Christ are there as well. Which one is the true cross? They don't know. They got 3 of them, right? Well, it just so happens, according to the legend, that at the moment they take them up, it just so happens that a funeral procession is going by. So what they do is they get all 3 crosses, they hold it up like this. And when the funeral procession goes under one cross, nothing, the second cross, nothing. Under Christ's cross, he goes back to life. Right? That's the true cross. The proving of the true cross, right? So that's how they know which one it was, and now they're thinking about, I guess, they got 10 minutes. Right? So there she is with her cross, right? Wearing full Roman armor that's based on a study of Catholicism. And the tree immediately next to it, right, is certainly a reference to the legend of the cross. The true cross, the same legend that was circulated that told us that St. Helena found it, also told us that it is the history of the cross. That actually part of the tree of knowledge was taken from Eden, grafted onto another tree, planted on the grave of Adam, and grew. And this tree was cut down and made the true cross. That was the legend, right? So the tree directly behind her is certainly a reference to the source of the true cross, right? Even though it's not on the grave path. Also the idea of resurrection. One wonders if St. Helena here with her bare feet is not intended to be in heaven, right? The way she looks skyward off, right? And certainly her eternal life is resurrection. Sorry? Could be the New Jerusalem, exactly. Well, this town is Beneliana. That actually can be identified. I've got the number one popular at the beginning of the class. That bridge is identified. The building at the bottom right at the top of the hilltop hill with its market village at the base of the hill. And so people go on and actually identify some of the towers on the top of the hill. That's, yes, paradise. But it's also, seems like kind of one thing, right? It's England's paradise, which is today's town. So it's due north of that, right? Okay, I'll send an email to the verified date on Friday, National Gallery Friday, right? George County in person, they will pop in what we got to, because we just saw them, depending on what's out there. So, as soon after 3 o'clock as you can at the main house, right, with the columns. And I will book them and I'll let you know. And if something goes wrong, like if I remember that one time we were going to go downtown and I found out that there was a rally. So I want to double check stuff downtown. and make sure that we're not coming down at the same time as the fire movement day, because we're pulling that, okay? Okay, see you guys.